Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This one's going to be my sort of Book 4 Earth kind of review discussion. So during the week, obviously, I did my initial thoughts as I went through my first watch through of the season. And I said at the end of them, I wanted to do a video after that would be a little bit more sort of like focused, a complete overview review of the season, and that's what we're going to do here. So I've typed up some kind of notes, some thoughts, and obviously I'll add to them as well as kind of going through them as well. This way we can be a little bit more directed and focused on what we're talking about, and it's organized in a way where we're roughly going through things in order. I do want to say right at the start that I did enjoy Book 4 Earth, but there will be criticisms of it throughout this, because it definitely wasn't perfect. There were definitely issues with a decent amount of stuff. And yes, look, it's exciting that the show is back after 3 years. I'm absolutely giving it that. But you can't, give it a positive review just because the show is back after a long break. In a way, it's been so long, I wouldn't expect it to have such kind of problems related to the writing, where it almost feels like, did you give this another writing pass? It doesn't feel like you did. So there's that. And then it is a time skip. So the time skip usually is a really good thing for a fandom to go through, because you get new character designs, and the fact that a certain amount of time that you don't really know about has happened usually leads to some interesting stuff. But as we'll get into here, they didn't use the time skip particularly well. I think, character-wise, in terms of just the kind of the humor, the way they do the character interactions, it's still really good. It's still a very high-quality show. But I think what Book 4 Earth really showed us was that it very much is the first quarter of Mystery of Arvos. And I think the fact that Arvos was really in it for like a couple of minutes, and that's it, was very, very telling. And what I would say is that I think in terms of the main plot, the actual journey we've been sent on to find the clues, to find where Arvos is, so far has not been incredibly interesting. So the core main plot is a little bit of a weakness in the show right now. And it's being held up by, I think, the nuance of the writing when it comes to certain other characters and arcs, which we'll get into. So let's jump in here with the time skip. So I say here, confusing use of a time skip. New designs, which are good, but next to no reference to what actually happened in the last 2 years. Especially with Rayla and Claudia, who have actually, it's at least alluded to the fact that they were up to stuff during those 2 years. The Rayla plot in particular is badly done, since it happens off screen from the episodes. And if you don't read the comic Through the Moon, or if you didn't read the web short that has the letter that Rayla left to Callum when she left, you would have very little context outside of the very vague way that they introduced this plot point in Book 4 itself. And I think that just highlights that, why would you do this? Like, I think start to finish, this decision is really confusing and baffling. Like, why did they make a decision to actually have something notable happen in the comics, and then do such a poor job about bringing people up to speed on it in the actual book? And the problem with it, as we'll get into, is that the plot that it left was not even that good, because it just basically was relationship drama between Rayla and Callum, which took away a really good dynamic from Book 3, and meant that the two characters were not communicating well for most of this book. And they didn't, in my mind, do anything particularly good with that with that premise, for the most part. There was setup for an interesting, how will they actually do the reunion and gradually get them back together, but so far I don't think it's been particularly well done. So like I says here, next to no context on this major plot point, extremely poorly done. I think reflecting on it, that's the big thing I have with the time skip, is that, okay, we get new designs for the characters. They've each aged by 2 years. The characters this most heavily affects are definitely, so far, Ezran and Zim. Otherwise, you could have definitely written this book to just take place like a month or a couple of weeks later, adjust a few things, and it would have been perfectly fine, I think, for this book to be set somewhat close to book 3. So far, they have done very little to, I think, justify why there was a time skip, and that's always a little bit of a kind of confusing thing where you really haven't justified it. Obviously, the plots that are meant to be there to justify it are that Rayla was actually looking for Viren, didn't find him, but then they just established that, like, what did she actually do in all of that time? She suddenly has Stella, but they don't explain exactly where she found Stella or anything like that. Same with Claudia. They established that she was up to stuff in Zadia, coming up with the stuff needed for the spell to do the first stage of the resurrection for her father. And she says, like, there's stuff I had to do I didn't know I was capable of doing, without actually saying any specifics, or particularly implying necessarily what it was that she was doing, other than just, I guess, killing creatures and maybe more. But are we going to get into it? I don't know. And then she also encounters someone new, and that's where we have Terry, but they don't explain where exactly Terry came from. And I get it. Again, I'll make the point here. I am aware of this, that because the seasons of The Dragon Prince are always much more focused than you think they're going to be, they never have as broad of a scope as you think they would, considering it's a fantasy show. They can absolutely do more with what Rayla and Claudia have been up to in later seasons and have references back to it. I just feel when you come back from a time skip, there's almost like a duty that you have, I think, to get people a little bit up to speed on what's been going on in all of this time. Especially because I think they directly had scenes where they kind of referenced in a way, should have explained them in specific scenes, but didn't, and specifically chose not to. And that's always a bit kind of confusing in that, like, I get it, it's a shock, it's a cool reveal that Viren was dead for 2 years before he was resurrected. That's interesting. It allowed for the cliffhanger at the end of basically the first episode of, if you weren't aware of this, Rayla left 2 years ago and hasn't come back. But I just don't think they do enough with it. And especially as someone who has read the comic, did read that short with the letter online, it still didn't feel that great. So the time skip so far, miss, I think. And outside of some cool new designs, I don't think there's too much positive to say about it so far. So let's get into what the plot of book 4 was. You have to say, it is ultimately a pretty basic plot when we're talking about, like, the main arc. And that is, basically, Zubeia transports them to the main entrance to Umber Tor. It's blocked, so they have to basically spend 3 episodes finding their way in from a secret passage. And that is effectively the main plot of this book. It's just get to Rex Igneous because he has a piece of the puzzle. The puzzle is the plot of Mystery of Erebos, and we'll get into that. So, like I say here, one of a few pieces of a puzzle. The character dynamics are much more interesting than the actual, like, what the plot actually is. But there are still issues with these characters' arcs that hold the book back. Now, it's not prevalent in every single character, but actually just with the main characters, oddly. So, the same sort of goes for the piece between both sides of the world plot. Good stuff, but I would say it is also too, I think, heavily focused on just Catullus and Lux Aurea. So basically, one human kingdom and then the Sunfire Forge or Fire Elves, and it's meant to represent peace between humans and elves, but I don't know if it quite does that. So, you know, like I say here, the lack of Zadian characters, especially leaders of the other kind of groups of elves, is heavily felt. And also, was there even a mention of any of the other human kingdoms this book? I don't really remember it, because, like, we didn't see Anya. Like, I expect we will see her again, because, again, she is someone where we will notice that she'll probably look quite different post-time skip. But say, like, Neolandia and the other places, who should all be sort of in this weird rebuilding state, given that they've lost their rulers and need a new one again. Especially Neolandia is in a weird spot with what happened to the prince. And I think they said that the king was in a coma, not that he was killed from the assassin magic that happened. So, the overall plot of Mystery of Arvos is a race between Claudia's group and Callum's group to find the clues to where Arvos' prison is and to free him from there. Now, Claudia's, of course, mission is very personal because it is, that's where the time limit comes from, is that Claudia's group sets the time limit in that they have 30 days to do it, otherwise Viren will die again. They need to free Arvos in this time so he can complete Viren's resurrection and kind of keep him alive for, I guess, the remainder of the life he would live. Callum's group obviously is more of a race of time to stop Claudia and co from doing this because Arvos is a threat to the world. Now, we did get the backstory here of effectively why Arvos sort of is a villain, why he was imprisoned in the first place. There's definitely more to the story. It was actually quite brief in episode 4, and it was interesting as well that they gave us basically most of this ahead of time. One of the final preview clips that they gave us was the first stage of the full backstory here. And I think it meant that there was only one other scene in that episode that actually gave us sort of more context to what was going on. But effectively, it is just that Arvos, kind of like he's been doing to Viren, and a little bit to Callum as we see here, he has been doing this over the centuries to humans, to people in Zadia, and he has basically been behind a lot of the chaos, conflict, and war within the world. And they quickly go over like a bunch of stuff that, like, say, Queen Aditi was important in maintaining peace in Zadia. We get the mysterious death of the moon archdragon, which Arvos is implied to sort of be behind. You get the Orphan Queen reference, which is a very cool one if you followed a lot of the information presented at like the Comic-Cons and stuff like that. So that's cool in that it relates to sort of like how the royal family of like Catullus works. She is sort of effectively, I guess, the origin of the key of Arvos, though I guess there's a bit of a story to be had there. But it does highlight that the Zadians are aware Arvos being behind everything is fundamentally information that came to light because of a human, which I think is a very interesting thing to note in all of this. And again, the key opens up something, but we don't know exactly what it is. Because the way it kind of works in context is sort of that I guess it is still possible for the key to be the key to Arvos' prison, but it does seem like the key to Arvos relates to something else because it exists before that decision was made, basically. So we'll see what exactly that actually leads to, but it's an interesting mystery to kind of have ultimately. So this means the plot is finding the archdragons who each have a piece of the puzzle. So to go through the information here about what we know. So Sky, we have, Avizandum / Zubeia. And now, obviously, we know what piece of the puzzle they had. It is the looking glass, aka the mirror, which is just meant to basically be a thing that you can look at to just keep track of what Arvos is doing. And we saw exactly how that works. It is more of a device that relates to Arvos rather than necessarily a piece of a puzzle to find him, but I guess it makes sense. Sun, as far as we're aware, the only Sun archdragon is Sol Regum. Now, we'll get into some information on him in a second, but it seems like he is theoretically not involved in whatever decision was made about distributing clues about where Arvos actually is. Earth, Rex Igneous. The entire plot of the book is about this. We know he has the map. That makes sense. Ocean, we know that the archdragon is called Domina Profundis, and she should be still active, and she theoretically should have the last piece of the puzzle to find out what's going on with Arvos. Moon was Luna Tenebris, but of course we are told she's dead, and there was no successor. And yes, they never exactly said what the deal is with regards to Like, are there other archdragons, and like, is it the title, or does that refer to a specific like size or type of dragon? We don't really know the full details surrounding that, but I think the implication from the visuals of like when the deal is made and the dragons that are involved seem to imply that there are only 4 dragons really involved in this when it happens, and because of course there's no evidence of there being a star archdragon. Because they're implied to basically be, I suppose, from space, and so they don't necessarily interact with Zadia or humans. And if we do see one, it's going to be this like crazy once in a lifetime type thing. So it does seem like the star one is kind of fundamentally disconnected from any sort of like leadership organization in Zadia. So what it means is that at the deal, Avizandum and Zubeia were there, but they only got 1 clue together, basically. Regum, I think this happens after he is blinded, so I think he's just out on his own, because at this point he is like, he's not the king of the dragons anymore, and I don't think the visuals showed him at all. So you have Avizandum, Zubeia, Rex Igneus, and Domina Profundis. They are the characters who are, you know, given a piece of the clue, meaning that there are actually, I think, only 3 clues, unless they're going to reveal more about this as we go on. So this means that the mirror and the map are accounted for, so there technically should be like 2 clues maybe. Sol Regum, Domina Profundis, but with Sol Regum's history and the episode 4 flashback, he doesn't seem to be featured, so he likely doesn't have a clue, though it would be interesting if they revealed that he did. But I'd be surprised if we do go back to him. I think we'll probably have to do something with him eventually, but we'll have to wait and see on that. It seems like he is very anti-human, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So with that out of the way, that means there should only be 1 clue left, and that should be with the Ocean Archdragon, which is Domina Profundis. So we'll see what that is, because the map seems like it's like 1 clue that just reveals everything. But I suppose the idea is just knowing where the prison is doesn't answer everything. There probably is a lock and key type thing going on, and so I'm guessing Domina Profundis has, I guess, the access to the prison, or the direct key that would actually free Aravos. But she, I guess, theoretically wouldn't know exactly where that is. So the question is obviously going to be, does the map lead them to Domina Profundis, or is it a location that not even Domina Profundis actually knows herself? And then there's this other thing of like, we know where it is, but we need to find the other archdragon to actually open it up or whatever. Now let's get into the map. So you do actually get a look at the map on the tooth. So this is like the closest you can get in terms of the one that actually shows the kind of X marks the spot thing. Now obviously it looks like this is either meant to be land masses or bodies of water. If you compare it to the actual map of Zadia, what's being shown on the tooth here is the bodies of water. So this is a big kind of like ocean, river, and then you have like rivers and stuff like that, streams. And if you look at the map of Zadia, it to me is very clearly referring to the Sea of the Cast Out, which is right here. Because you can see a large body of water with 5 things coming off it on basically all the corners where like they would be on like a pentagon. So the top, the side, this side, and then the bottom as well. And you see that here. One at the top, one at the side, this side, and then the 2 kind of legs basically. Similarly, you have this sort of like loop here in a way where it's like roughly connected, and you have the same thing here, and then it does stem off up here into other stuff. It seems to basically match what we know of the map. So I think X marks the spot should be right in the middle of the place known as the Sea of the Cast Out, which, if it's named after the fact that Aravos is imprisoned there, that's pretty impressive, but otherwise, like, what does it actually mean? I'm guessing this should theoretically be an ocean territory, but I'm not really sure, because the ocean elves, I think are the ones that, what are they called, like tide elves or something, are the ones we really haven't interacted with, like, at all outside of, I think they showed one ocean mage who was involved in the spell that actually imprisoned Aravos. So we'll see if we get to meet that character or what. There's the Tidebound Archipelago up here, which I'm guessing is maybe more of where they actually live. So this leaves this as maybe just a general body of water. Now, interestingly, it is actually close to, I think this is the, ruins of Alarion. So there's that as a sort of interesting location as well. But still, that to me highlights that the next book theoretically should be Book 5, Ocean, if that's indeed where we're going. Because obviously we're getting to Book 5 and Book 6. So it either has to be Ocean or Star next. And given where the plot is, I think it makes much more sense for it to be Ocean. And then Book 6 to be Star, which I guess would be the book where Aravos is actually freed and we get more of the reveals on Aravos. And then Book 7 would get some different name. Maybe it's Dark, maybe it's something like Balance or whatever way you want to call it. And that would be the resolution to things. That's probably the way they're going to do it. Now, let's get into characters here. So we'll start with Callum. And obviously from here, we'll do it kind of in groups. So we'll do kind of Callum's group, go into kind of Claudia's group and so on. So, cool new timeskip design, of course. But he, as like the main character, it feels really weird that he is probably one of the more directionless characters in the show. And you could go as far as to say that going into, say, like Book 2 and 3 as well, his arc has been more focused on like the growth of his magical powers. And I felt like, especially when they did the whole Sky Arcanum thing in Book 2, that is the path that they're going to have this character go on. But oddly, they don't even do that much with regards to Callum learning new magic. He seems to have a few new spells, but it's really hard to judge his progression, because I think we're all expecting him to get the Arcanum for all the different types of magic, but they didn't do anything with that in this book, in that like he still doesn't have like Moon either, or Sun, or any of these other ones that like he theoretically has access to people who would be willing to explain to him what the core of like an Arcanum is and help him learn it, but that hasn't happened yet. So the arc here, I think, is badly affected by how poorly done the whole Rayla disappears for 2 years arc actually is. It does mean that most of Callum's scenes are him being sad because Rayla either isn't here, or when she's back, he is frustrated about the fact that she's kind of just returned and almost like expects things to go back to normal immediately. And then from there, all they seem to do is the idea of like, oh, it's going to take time. We're going to be awkward around each other for a lot of time. We're going to do the bare minimum communication so that the group still functions, but we're not really going to properly talk about what happened. And it's just, like I say here, it's hashtag drama. It's not proper dramatic storytelling. It's just relationship drama for the sake of relationship drama. Because I don't feel many of the scenes that they had between the two characters did anything all that impressive between them. About the most significant thing with Callum that they did this book was the attempt at a sort of Will Callum Go Dark arc, where Aravos even referenced the idea that like, oh, he's already tainted by darkness because he used dark magic once, even though we had the end of Book 2 scene where he basically chose effectively the Sky Arcanum over leaning towards dark magic. Now, I'm okay with like them bringing this up again, but to me, there was no consistency whatsoever with regards to Callum in Book 4 being on this path to darkness. Yes, it was a surprise that Aravos was able to just like, force choke him and do magic through the mirror so easily compared to like what it seemed to be with Viren. But that's not really on Callum, in my opinion. Yes, they in the flashback alluded to the idea that Aravos did most of his work through manipulating a mage who was interested in learning magic. And so that fits Callum, and I guess is Callum the next historical figure that's going to lead to whatever happens happening. And it's like, sure, go for this, but I don't think many scenes in this book actually did it. And it made it so that that scene where he was like, Rayla, kill me, came so out of the blue that it was just like, no, 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 you can't do this based on this arc and how it's been so far. So thankfully Rayla did like basically completely like shut him down on this of like, no, I'm not doing this. Stop thinking this way. This is not the way it's going. They had the little scene afterwards where he was considering throwing away the cube. But again, because they haven't particularly said what exact use the cube is, it's hard to know, like, was that a good or bad decision? Because I think Callum is almost thinking that that means the key will unlock something that will benefit Arvos. But in the past, it was basically said that the key of Arvos basically outed Arvos as being the villain. So it was a positive thing. So I don't really know. Other than the fact that the Harrow message said that the key would unlock something in Zadia, which almost implies that it's the key to Arvos' prison. But like I said before, it existed before Arvos was even caught. So it does something else unless they made use of it as a key as well. So we'll see what they do with that. So yeah, just going back to this, you know, the slow improvement of the relationship is done in a very basic way. It was just, you know, they talk, they look at each other, they get slightly embarrassed, and they look away. And I'm wondering, like, is this a sense of, like, is this them maybe addressing a little bit of the kind of criticism that, like, Book 3 had for, were they kind of put together as a couple, like, too quickly in just the space of that one book? I think most people, ended up quite liking it. And the way to go after that was not to basically break them apart for 2 years and then have this awkwardness as the next stage and they'll truly get properly together as a couple going after this. It's just, you can keep them together but develop their dynamic with each other more through their romantic relationship. And I think so few shows in a way have a confidence to just do that, and they always feel that the way to go with a relationship like this is to put rifts in the way and have drama and conflict be how you do it. And you don't have to do that. And I don't think it benefited their relationship all that much. In that by the end of the book, it feels like, okay, they're kind of closer. They had the Callum moment where he was like, go. Like he gave kind of Rayla permission this time to go after Viren on her own. But what I was thinking more in that scene is like, why aren't you going with her? Because she's rushing out to face Viren and Claudia and Terry basically on her own. Why isn't the mage going with her to support her against, Claudia and like two mages basically? That was, to me, the confusing part of that scene. I get what they were going for, was it was meant to, I think, be Callum getting over the idea of wanting to be sort of like, you left, I'm annoyed at you because you left, and him actually saying you can go on your own is this kind of way past that. But I don't think it was as strong as they maybe wanted it to be overall, and I think the writing here just, to me, didn't work as well. Like I said, the Callum go dark arc is fine, but it was like 2 scenes in the entire book, and I didn't get any sense, like, did Callum make any move at all this book to use dark magic? I don't think he did, as far as I was aware. He gathered some of the crystals in the cave, but even then, that was a bit of a weird scene as well. And they need to do the moon spell, but they have Rayla do it. And fair enough, like, Rayla, I suppose, through Runan, knew about this spell more than Callum did, but Callum's the mage, and we're expecting him to maybe gain moon magic as the next arcanum. Why couldn't they have done something with that? There were weird moments like that through edit that just felt like, what are we doing? And that's the whole point here about, when is this progress going to happen? I expect much more from, effectively, the main character. This book, he felt only really important because he holds the key of Arvos, more so than any actions that he had in the story. Rayla. So, same issues as Callum, but worse since she was the one who disappeared. So, she was doing stuff for 2 years that we are not told about. And it's a weird one because she comes back after 2 years and she views it like a full 2 years as being like, I failed, I couldn't do anything on a mission, so I came back. Why didn't she do it after 1 year? Why 2 full years? That's what they haven't addressed or acknowledged just yet. Nothing is really said about what she did or what she found or anything like that. There's no implication that she came anywhere near Claudia or Viren or anything like that. The only thing that seems to have happened is that she found Stella. And obviously Stella's interesting because Stella is a star-related animal. So Stella has star magic and a connection to the star primal, which is obviously a very rare thing, and we see the whole portal magic that she has. But Rayla obviously was surprised when she saw this in use, so she doesn't even know that necessarily about Stella. So what's going on there? Why wasn't there a story about where Stella came from? And look, I get it, they brought it up in terms of the Arvos criticizing the main characters while he was possessing Callum. He again brought up the whole, the moon assassin who won't kill, lol, situation. There's one line where she says something about like, oh, I failed again. And I'm guessing, like, is that what they're going for with her character arc? Is the idea that she has constantly failed start to finish on this story? Not true, that's a very negative view on things, but a couple of notable failures that she seems to have. But again, like the whole Callum going dark arc, they didn't address it all that much. So what am I meant to view with her arc? Again, love the new time skip design for her, but it like with the relationship stuff, it hasn't fully come together for me. Now, finally, they did do something notable with Rayla to really bring her into the spotlight. And that was, they finally revealed the whole situation of, like, what does and doesn't Rayla know about the whole, her parents and Runan being in the coins. They seemed to go with the idea that she didn't know they were in coins ahead of time. And the revenge against Viren was just that she knew Viren confronted her parents. And this is obviously the weird thing about the spell that Callum did. I'm guessing, like, this was meant to reveal by showing Callum what happened in the past. So why wouldn't it have shown Viren doing the spell and putting the parents in coins? And why wouldn't Callum have relayed that to Rayla? There is a bit of a weird sort of like kind of plot holey feel to this, that like that information should have been out already. And if you read the comic Through the Moon, it basically alluded to this as well, because while she was in the sort of in-between world, she saw basically her parents and Runan in this sort of like half-alive state in the same way she saw Viren. And that's meant to be what actually informed her to go out on the quest. But they didn't say any of that in the show, or even like allude to the fact that anything like that has happened. So there's a weirdness to this of like, I like that she finally sees Viren is alive, but then she gets the coins back, and it almost means that like, well, other than that villain, like she views Viren as the villain, she wants to take him out. She has basically what she was looking for back. Now, it's an interesting kind of dynamic because, of course, she gets tricked by Claudia. That leads to an interesting moment for Claudia where Claudia does come back because she realizes that this was a kind of exceptionally cruel act to do this deal. The hero does it, and then she basically pulled a full-on villain move and is basically called out for performing a truly like kind of villainous act, and she attempts to redeem herself by giving them back. Now, it seems like Claudia herself didn't know the full scope of what exactly happens with the people once they're in the coins, in that she's like, if I throw them into the lava, I don't actually know what's going to happen. And that, like, do their souls just disappear? Will they pop out again but then die because they're in lava? And so the question is obviously going to be from here, what do they do with the coins? Can Callum find a way to reverse this, and will he have to use dark magic to do the reversal, is probably the big question. So that's going to be a fascinating one, because I can't imagine they keep that going on too long. Just like effectively like Rayla carrying around this weird kind of like half corpse artifact almost of 3 of her 4 parental figures. So I think they should probably attempt to address that as soon as they can, hopefully. And maybe them bonding over this will be what fully brings Rayla and Callum back together. I think that's a decent way to do things. On Stella, star primal connection, and again, star magic seems exceptionally rare. We've only met one star touch elf, and we have no idea what the deal is with any of the others, or no one's saying anything about it. Like I mentioned before, there's basically no mention at all about like the idea of like star dragons or anything like that. And they even go as far as to, in that crystal cave, to say that, oh yeah, even crystals that have star magic inside of them are also exceptionally rare. There are only 3, what were they, like quasar diamonds in the entire world. And I don't know where they are. So for say like Callum, who we maybe expect to gain all of the magics, he has no access to star primal. But I suppose at least with Stella in the party has some star magic. If maybe part of the whole mystery with the key of Aravos is that you just need to have all 6 together. At least with Stella, there's a star-related thing in their party. Otherwise, it kind of feels like, well, with the mirror cracked, like, say, Callum, it's not like Aravos can just manipulate Callum and like, oh, I'll teach you star magic if you do what I want to do. And it almost feels like that was a bit of a mistake almost. To make the decision to smash that mirror and keep Aravos out of the plot. Interesting. Ezran, in general, well done. The leader the world needs, doing the best he can in a changing world. Still has doubts. That was the sort of criticism of him from Aravos. But I think he has the support of most of the key important characters. I think they all like him as king. Opeli, the Crown Guard, his brother. I think everyone views that like, okay, he's idealistic, but I think this is the right approach for this era. And I think people like that. Now, it is an interesting one with him. The contrast in a way, the fight with the character of, do you need him to be part of the team on the journey? Or should you keep him as the king in Catalyst? Because that's where the interesting kind of thing is with him, is that he didn't feel as important on the journey this time out as he did in like the first 3 seasons. And I actually like a lot of the scenes where he is king, both from previous books and in this book at the start. So, but they obviously, he's the one with the strong connection to Zim, and Zim you basically have to have on the missions. So it feels like a bit of a kind of weird one where the king is always going to have to be away on the missions, and is that the right thing to do necessarily? And again, this is that sort of struggle with the show and its scope. You would say it has the potential to be this really broad fantasy thing, but they've often kept things quite small scale in many ways. He's the character who probably benefits the most from the time skip, just because he was very young in the first season. But they still did good stuff with his character. But the 2 years, I think, are really just going to help him. Love the character redesign, and I think it just helps him to be a more kind of a king people can actually respect more going forward. So we'll see what they do with that. But overall, you'd say not too much to say, other than arguably within the drama of the Callum-Rayla relationship, arguably Ezran and Soren are the strongest characters within that, with their scenes talking to Ezran talking to Callum and Soren talking to Rayla. So Soren himself, like the whole family, him, Viren, Claudia, they're all fascinating characters. I think in general they're much more interesting characters than most of, say, like the main cast, just because they have that which side are they on, and how do they feel about which side they're on dynamic. And he specifically, obviously, after 3 seasons, they eventually made the decision. He's the one who will step away from the family and fully commit to that role of crown guard, protecting the king, who he views as being the true king, and that is Ezran, and they continue that here. And the big thing, he's absolutely thriving away from his father in particular, but does clearly wish that Claudia would come back to the right side. And that's the kind of conflict with his character, because I think he absolutely made the right decision for himself to step away from the family. And you can see by just those early episodes before the journey properly starts that like he's in a great position. He has like Corvus as his like kind of second in command on the Crown Guard, and everything's going pretty well for him, you would say. And it's just those slight doubts about basically the family connection that are kind of present here. Otherwise, I think everything that they've done with him so far in the book has been, I think, taking him on the right path. And yeah, he seems like this almost enlightened character after book 3. You know, the whole, you know, him caring about Zadia and the animals and creatures, and him actually having a pretty strong connection with dragons was actually a really nice arc to have. With whole what's the dragon's name, Pyra or something like that, the other kind of like sun dragon thing that from the book 2 arc, the one who paralyzed him basically. There's a relationship there. Him becoming like a Drake dragon rider was actually nice. It was probably the best thing that happened in that like mini arc with the Drake riders, which was not much of anything. The scene with him talking to Zebea while they're flying and everyone else is asleep was actually really, really nice. I like that for both characters actually, and just in general, like seeing him within that family be the one to, I suppose, properly embrace Zadia from a perspective of he wants to sort of protect what's there, whereas his father and sister seem to just view everything as like a source for dark magic. That is interesting stuff. Yeah, and with the whole him and Claudia, the sort of surprise meeting there, you would say nice stuff. It was probably more getting across Claudia's point of view in all of this stuff than necessarily it being too much detail in terms of their relationship. The big one, I guess, is that they do bring up the whole Viren healed Soren in the past with dark magic plot point, which I think previously was only mentioned in the novelization for one of the previous 2 books, the first 2 books. Interestingly, they cliff-hung an episode on him, Viren being alive, revealed to Soren. But I don't think they actually had any scenes of Viren like directly talking to Soren. So I'm guessing they're keeping that one more for later, because they didn't really bring up the whole idea of remember Soren killed like the vision of his father in front of Claudia, and it was this shocking moment until it was revealed to be like an illusion. That's a very interesting point. And I'm wondering, will they bring up the whole idea? We know the mother left because of the kind of dark magic resurrecting their son plot. So does Viren in some way blame Soren for this? Feels like there's a few things like that we need to get into, especially because Viren seems a little bit more pensive going forward. It would have been interesting to get proper scenes with Soren and his father. But in general, I think Soren is in a pretty good spot with how he's being used overall. I don't get any sense that he's going to like switch sides again. It seems like he fully knows what side he wants to be on. And this is more on Claudia and Viren and the choices they're going to make, given that they're the ones propelling the arc that's causing a threat to the world forward. So, Claudia. Absolutely the most interesting character probably in this book, because she takes the step up into basically being the main threat. I hesitate to say the main villain, just because I think the entire point of her arc is she is not quite stepping over the line to becoming full-on evil villain. But she is going down the exact path of her father and has adopted that approach of do whatever it takes to protect those that you care about. That's what she basically roughly said the last 2 years were about. Traveling as Adia, gathering all the ingredients, all the animals needed for the dark magic to do what needs to be done. And I think, again, they've really highlighted through even some of the short story content that they put out before the book. Claudia does not deal well with loss, both in terms of people dying, but also people sort of like leaving her. She didn't deal well with Soren leaving in the first place. She hasn't dealt well with basically like Callum, Ezran, and everyone else choosing basically the opposite side to her. And we're seeing that kind of still here. She fully believes that she is on the right side, and that the very interesting point, I think, in all of this was that she's not just completely defined by, I want to protect the people close to me, but she did also make the argument that sort of like Arvos is this like important person for humanity, that he gave us magic, and because of that, I can't view him as just being this agent of chaos who is out to ruin the world. And I think the only main point with that one is just that I suppose we haven't particularly been told necessarily what exactly Arvos's like plan or end game is. Like, is it just to be the controller of the world? It seems like he's a bit too nuanced of a character for that. Is it just that he wants to sow chaos across the world and thrive from that? I don't really know. And a lot's going to depend on when Arvos properly comes into play in the story, what he is up to. And that will change, I guess, Claudia's view, depending on where she's at that point. I do like that we do get moments where she's just the kind of Claudia we've known for all of these books. And especially with Terry around now, she gets these kind of little kind of romantic moments as well. So very much highlighting that she's not just in this arc where it's all this desperate journey to save her father's life. The core of who Claudia is still here. I think it's probably more on Viren to be like, will he be maybe the one to bring her back from the path that she is full on going down? Yeah, the Rayla moment was interesting, just to highlight that it hurt her when Terry said that that was a cruel thing to do. She does not want to be viewed as being cruel, whereas I don't think Viren cares particularly if people view him that way. And that's the kind of key point here, is when will she not make a move that is viewed as being irredeemable? And obviously this is going to, I think, come down to committing to freeing Arvos. If she is the one ultimately that makes that happen, that's a tough thing to come back from. But we'll have to, of course, see how she views Arvos when he actually is freed and is let loose on the world, basically. So, Viren himself, very, very interesting. I think going into the book, this was going to be the most sort of fascinating decision about how they portray the character. Because I don't think you can just resurrect him and have him just be the character he was at, say, like the end of book 2 throughout most of book 3. And I think they did it right here. Of like, he is this character who is clearly affected by the fact that he died and is resurrected and has now just been told, you will die in 30 days unless you do this crazy act to free the guy who you probably have your own doubts about. And I think that's an interesting point in it as well, is that I do think Viren is more cautious about like what Arvos theoretically can do than Claudia is. I think Claudia does think it will be a good thing to free Arvos in some weird way, whereas I think Viren is kind of like, I'll use your power to allow me to have the effect I want on the world. But like they kind of discussed in book 3, it doesn't seem like Viren necessarily wanted to like full on take over the world, and was sort of like almost like just last minute sort of convinced of like, you need to do this to get enough power to do what you want to do. We'll see where they exactly go with that. And yeah, he is more in the back seat here. It's interesting to see Claudia take the lead over her father in all of this. And he can, I think, very much see that she's doing what he has done many times before. And I like that moment where he kind of proposes the idea of like, what if we just enjoy these last 30 days together? Like, you don't have to put the effort in to do all of this. I'll get my last days with you, and we can just let it be, basically. But of course, Claudia, her kind of fear of loss, effectively, she does kind of convince him to kind of fight for the full resurrection. And he goes along with it, and I suppose by the end of the book, it's a very interesting point about, like, he's very hesitant to use dark magic. And then basically, like, the final scene on that side of the plot is showing, like, he uses dark magic to kind of open up a hole in the mountain to get them out. And he has the kind of dark magic form. But you're not really sure what way to interpret that, because him just having the dark magic face doesn't really mean anything other than that, like, I guess he still has all those years of, like, dark magic corruption behind him. He is still a pawn, effectively, for Arvos to use, and now he's using dark magic again. Is it a signifier that he's committed to the cause even more? I'm not really sure. I still think he does very much have doubts about what they're doing and what Claudia is doing. And like I say here, yeah, I do think he will end up being the member of the group who's more questioning of what they're doing. And then his relationship with Terry was interesting, because he obviously... Viren doesn't like a lot of the goofiness that I suppose happens with sort of Claudia, with Soren, and I guess now with Terry as well. After Terry kills Ibis, and is upset about having killed someone, he does ask for advice, basically, and he's kind of like... Viren's advice is pretty good right up until the point of just, like, get a grip. They then have the kind of reverse conversation where, you know, Terry's like, I was thinking a lot about what you said about kind of getting a grip, and Viren's like, oh, did I really say that? And they seem to kind of get on a little bit better after that, and he even goes as far as to say, like, oh, I guess you are kind of weird and wonderful. So, you know, I think he's, like, accepting of kind of Terry as, like, okay, you're in a relationship with my daughter, you seem like a pretty good person. And then I suppose interesting as well, that the whole scene of, like, kind of Terry revealing to, like, the audience as well as Viren that he's trans. It's interesting that that scene happens with him and Viren. I guess it makes sense, because I guess Claudia knows already, and they had that conversation at some point over the last 2 years. But it was an interesting one to see, like, oh, just have a scene where Viren, of all characters, is very accepting of it. And again, it's highlighting that, you know, his villainous aspects don't necessarily come from a full-on, like, hatred of Zadia or people for who they are. It's like the whole family, it's wanting to protect the people close to them. So there's that. So getting into Terry, I think pretty fun new addition. Ended up being, like, the main representative of what an earth elf is actually like, in terms of, like, the special power where they go into, like, the earth form, and they can make things grow quicker, they can control plants. That's pretty cool. Let down a little bit by, you know, not really covering, like, how he and Claudia actually met. I'm assuming it's going to come up at some point, because I think there has to be a bit of a whole idea about, like, wait, how did this random earth elf kind of, like, do this? Now, does it relate to the whole kind of story of kind of him being trans? Does that mean he was, like, an outcast of where he was from, and so meeting up with this random other person was interesting? And then, like, is there anything to the fact that Terry doesn't seem particularly off-put by the idea of dark magic, like, inherently? There are some interesting things like that. As for the trans reveal, I thought it was well done, making it clear without making it, like, the lone defining trait of the character. In that sense, I think waiting to actually have this reveal until, like, what was it, in episode, like, 7 or 8 or something like that, they did the reveal in, that was a good thing, because you get to know the character before you know this kind of, like, detail, and then it is kind of just one scene. Here are the details, just so you know, and they kind of move on. Viren, like I said, of all characters, accepts it, and it's just like, yeah, that's cool. they're not hiding behind the, we revealed it in an interview type thing, like people often get frustrated by with these things. But they're also not suddenly making this the entire focus of the character. So I thought that this was ultimately the correct way to do it. He obviously has the whole thing where he kills Ibis, struggles with it, gets the advice, of course. And then just some final things on this group. The Aravos butterfly guide thing and stuff like that. Liked the possession scene. But oddly, the decision for have Aravos smash the mirror feels like it only serves this purpose of almost like taking him completely out of the story until he gets found. In that, like, are we going to see any Aravos like next book except for maybe like the last episode or two when we get to the prison or where it is or whatever, if that's even exactly what the map leads to. And then the butterfly guide thing that hatched out of the cocoon, I felt this was a complete non-event. I was expecting way more from this thing that had been built up for so long. I get it technically did guide them in the right way, but it felt like they just wanted to make a few slime jokes with this thing. We'll see if it amounts to anything more going forward, but I was kind of let down by what it actually was about. Then we get into the other plot, which was the whole like Janai Amaya plot. I'd say surprise hit of the book was this arc, because you had this combined with the woman and the Sunfire Elf and the ritual to send the kind of soul off. That whole plot, I think, actually did work quite well. Again, the time skip has an effect on this because after 2 years, it feels like we should have more progress with regards to relationships between humans and elves. And it does feel like with this arc that if you had told me only like a couple of weeks had passed, I would believe you. And almost it feels less realistic to say that, oh, wait, this is how far we've gotten 2 years. It feels a bit off in that sense that we're only dealing with this stuff now. And that's how I think they have mismanaged the time skip a little bit with how it affects all of these arcs. Yes, it's obviously meant to be representative of a broader issue across the entire world, that this small specific thing between Catullus and Lux Aria probably represents other human nations with other elf races, but they didn't make it clear enough. And like I said, I don't like how little of Zadia is involved in this arc. And then with regards to her relationship with Amaya, while I think they let us down with how they handled the Rayla Callum one, I thought they did the relationship with Amaya pretty well in that, I suppose getting into a little bit of the Amaya stuff, Amaya's support of Janai, I think really helped to kind of shape Janai into the leader in a way that they need at this point of sort of transition, given that what's happened to their kind of like actual kind of city and how they have to live in this kind of camp for now, but there's hope for the future. I think, having the kind of human perspective and being close to it has meant she's gone into this with more of an open mind and is in a better position to actually adapt to what's happening in all of this. So I think they did a good job about making that all, I think, come together pretty well overall. So then we get into the whole thing with her brother, Kareem. I think it's Kareem. Was it Kasim? I forget the exact details there. But while he was a little over the top as a character, I think it was it was a pretty good job at doing an internal conflict within the Sun Elves. The whole tradition versus progress and what is the right balance to be had here. And again, I think helped by Amaya, Janai found a way to be the leader for, what they're dealing with now. And that is not to leave all tradition behind, but also to, in a way, use this as an opportunity to evolve and realize that some of these traditions are weird. They just get in the way of society being better. Like the whole blood battle thing to decide who should be leader is just like, yeah, that is a little bit of a stupid rule to have, because it basically just asks for there to be constant conflict over the leadership. And if there is constant conflict over the leadership, the leaders aren't going to be able to do anything to help the people. And so, stuff like that. The way she handled the tribunal, I thought was good, where the woman got a punishment, but it wasn't death, because it doesn't need to be death. And instead, it's like this human can learn more about our culture while also building something which is her job that will allow us to do this tradition while adapting to the new place that we're in. It's like perfect, absolutely logical. And I think most people ended up like agreeing with it. The does she want to be queen arc was brief, but solidly done. Could have used a little bit more time. Again, this is where like the time skip I think would have come into play a little bit more. I would have liked a little bit more of an explanation about like where do we really stand when it comes to her as queen, and that obviously I get the impression she preferred just being a warrior and supporting the queen, but now she's been forced into this role. This is where a little bit of a kind of flashback into the time skip would have been nice, to see her maybe struggling in the early days, and her brother maybe not seeing it, which is why he has this view that Janai will step aside if I confront her. But overall pretty good. Amaya. Janai was obviously the focus of this arc, but Amaya played an important role in this. They gave enough scenes to highlight that Amaya is this like experienced, obviously general, but obviously she's sort of connected, obviously, like to a royal family, so she knows how this stuff works as well and can give good advice as well. And yeah, inspired her to find a more balanced way to do things. Other than that, you had like the scene in like the first episode of just like the kind of proposal scene gone wrong. There's the little bit of a kind of, even Amaya doesn't fully like completely respect all traditions of the Sunfire Elves, and that she was a little bit dismissive of the whole idea of like, wait, the crime you've accused her of is blowing out a candle, and it's like, okay, I get that that's not the best way to view it, but the only criticism I'd have of that arc is I don't like how they kind of just almost ignored the fact that the guy burned her hands. I didn't like how that was just almost viewed as being like an acceptable response that doesn't need to be put on trial in any way either. I don't know. I have a feeling they might do something where that character, who I think her name was Lucia, and that Sunfire Elf might end up having a friendship. Maybe they'll do romance with it. I don't know. We'll see if they address that or show it going forward. But the right move. Kareem. Kind of a frustrating character here, because yes, the overall presentation of him was a bit over the top, a bit much, not as nuanced here. But they didn't go full on like, I'm the villain now. But seeing him so blatantly trying to like overthrow his sister was perhaps a bit much. But it allowed for, like I said, that interesting internal conflict between the Sun Elves and tradition versus progress. And I like the idea that like he feels that like the people are behind me because like I'm hearing that people are agreeing that there are problems with our current situation. And you are saying that the other members of the tribunal also kind of feel the same way. And she's more or less just confirming that, yeah, they have some doubts. But she's saying, like his girlfriend, I guess, is saying, I'm not sure if they're ready to full on side with you, but they do have some complaints. And he leaps on this and is like, well, if they have complaints, they'll side with me, of course. And it's him kind of not realizing the idea that people are not as obsessed with tradition as he is, and that people can accept some change if they ultimately view it as being an improvement. And I think the fact that the way the punishment was done for the woman, Lucia, was actually, I think most people ended up like quite liking that and agreeing with it. And yes, there are still some problems along the way, but obviously the idea is that 2 years have passed, and if this is the worst thing we've dealt with, that's pretty good. It has to be the viewpoint. So we'll see where they go with him, because obviously the conflict was resolved quite quickly. It was like he fired a few blasts, she forces her way through them, she cuts his staff, and she again breaks tradition and is like, I'm not going to kill you. That's not how we do things anymore. Accept that. There is the whole thing about like the sun seed and stuff like that. The idea that they won't be here to sort of see the sun elf culture like thrive like it did in the past once again. But Janai is very much just like, we have to be the ones to sort of get it to the next generation. And that is important as well. Whereas he kind of wants to be there when they're back in the ascendancy, without realizing that it's kind of not possible. It's him not at all embracing any change when he probably should. Will they do more with this in the future? I'm not sure. I'd be happy if this was just a resolution to this, and that the main ending of this is a general idea of hope for humans and elves to have peace, and this to be representative of everything else. But they do need to bring other elves, other human kingdoms into play, for sure. The Drake Riders / Drakewood plot, and I guess we can also bring the little bit with the two guardians of the door to Umber Tor into play. I felt a lot of this sort of like Earth lore aspect was extremely forgettable. Now, it has been this kind of almost surprising part of the Dragon Prince, is that a lot of the reveals about the different areas of Xadia have not been like incredibly interesting, and I think this Earth aspect here was really not well done. I hesitate to say not well done. It didn't stand out that much, in that like, okay, Rex Igneous, cool, nice looking dragon. Terry was interesting. But the Drake Riders, just the whole plot they were going for there, just I never felt like it really came together in terms of what they were trying to do with the main guy that Soren had a fight with. And Nathan was sort of interesting as like a guide through the kind of like underground areas. But again, they didn't do that much with any of it. It to me made the Earth section just feel like, oh yeah, this show, when it is just doing the traveling journey, has never been like that incredible. It's very much relied on the characters. Like, does anyone particularly remember the Midnight Desert as being like that interesting of a location? No, instead you remember the Rambler animal, and you remember Nyx, and that was more or less the arc that brought Rayla and Callum together as a couple. Not necessarily the journey, the lore of the land specifically at that point. And it's sort of similar here, except also the character dynamics as we went through it weren't as strong, which is why I say the weakness of this book was unfortunately the main arc with like Rayla, Callum, that group. It just never fully quite came together. Rex Igneous, I suppose, as an important dragon, interesting characterization, as more of like the typical dragon from fantasy you'd expect. The main thing that I really liked was the reveal that he didn't know about Avazandum, and he sort of changed when he was told Avazandum died. Other than that, he was just meant to be a kind of hot-headed dragon, and I do wish they'd maybe done again a little bit more with him, but you know, interesting enough. And that's sort of like some of the last notes I really kind of have about the book. Again, it's really good that the show is back, but I would definitely say they really do need to get book 5 out, I think, sooner rather than later. I get it, we're going to have at least a couple of months off, but I hope we don't have to wait like a year until the next book. I have a feeling we won't be waiting that long, because they've more or less said that they've done book 4, 5, 6, and now they're also saying 7 is also being included in Mystery of Arvos as well. So we should be kind of in a way getting 4, 5, 6, 7 back to back to back, pretty much. I would expect 5 sooner rather than later, because I do think it's needed. I do think book 5 is also going to probably be structured somewhat similar to this, just with more of a ocean style theme to it, probably. But now that we're past the sort of intro to the time skip, we probably should be in a little bit of a more interesting spot with things going forward. In that, okay, Claudia and co have the map, so they know where to go straight away. Our heroes are in a bit of a weird spot, because Rayla, I suppose, is going to want to get straight to investigating how to free her parents from the coins. And they're maybe not going to know exactly where to go with the next stage of their journey to try and intercept them. So what's happening there? Now, because they have Zubeia on their side, they can theoretically get to anywhere in Zadia like as soon as they need to, pretty much. But it is going to be interesting to see how that exactly works. Like, might they just accept at this point that, like, have they lost? Or will they go and look for more information about, like, okay, well, they're going to get to the location first, but we know there's another archdragon that has to be dealt with first. So what if we instead search for, let me get the name again, up here. Let's go search for Domina Profundis, who apparently has the final potential clue. Now, will it just be a case if you get to the location on the map, she's there, or what? I'm not sure. But it does seem like they potentially don't fully know about that. But it will be interesting, because they do still have the butterfly creature, who should be directing them to the right things that they need to do. So maybe that creature will be more important in the next book. But I have a feeling that's probably the right way to do things, is to have the heroes focus on finding the last clue, while the others find the location. And we'll see what exactly the trick is once they get there. Because obviously, a location in the middle of a sea doesn't necessarily feel like that's where Arvos is being kept hidden. Because he doesn't know where he is. If he was underwater, we assume he'd know where he is. So it feels like it's probably some sort of a thing where, like, it's a thing where there's like a portal to where Arvos is, and the location of said portal is there. But to go through the portal, you need the clue from Domina Profundis. I have a feeling it might be something like that. But that's where we're at. So if I was to give this the book a score out of 10, definitely not 10 out of 10. I don't think it was strong enough to be a 9 out of 10. Meaning that I think the highest score we're probably potentially arguing for is an 8. And I'd maybe hesitate with that as well, because I do think 8 is probably like the score for some of the previous books, and I think there were more weaknesses here. So I'm leaning more to maybe like a 7.5 is probably where this is. Still a good score, but there was an element of almost rustiness coming back here, and like it just not fully coming together. Some great things, but definitely some problems still. So I think 7.5 is the right spot for this, in terms of not overly kind of having a super positive perspective just because the show is back, but not being hypercritical either. So they're my thoughts on Book 4, Earth of the Dragon Prince. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.